Hi, I'm Whitney. Welcome to my channel. Today we're gonna do my April wrap-up. I've been reading a lot of heavy science fiction, a lot of epic fantasy, so I needed a little bit of break. I read 11 books this month, which is probably about my average. Let's start off with the first one, which is called Unconquerable Sun. I'm gonna be honest, this book I picked up almost exclusively because of the author. I have always been a diehard fan of Kate Elliott. I really am a huge fan of some of her high fantasy series, and I really liked a lot of her young adult novels. I thought that they added a lot to the genre. I just really enjoy a lot of her character work. So when I found out that this was her first foray into science fiction, I was very excited to read it, didn't care what it was about, I just went out and bought it. This book was, I would say, kind of like a combination between a little bit of a taste of Red Rising, a little bit of a memory called Empire, if you're familiar with those works. But this novel is more on the edge of adult rather than YA, and it is about a girl named Sun. And she is the daughter of an empress who's controlling an interplanetary empire. As you can imagine, in such an area of power, she has quite a lot of politics that are invading all of her relationships over her entire life, both with her friends and with her mother. She doesn't have any like normal relationships that you would expect from typical people of this age and era. This novel is filled with a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of power plays and there's a lot of sneaky behavior. A little bit of Game of Thrones reminiscent, a little bit of some of the other novels that I have mentioned. This novel started off very slow, which I felt was pretty unusual for Kate Elliott as an author. I did get into it by about halfway, but interestingly enough, I didn't actually enjoy the main character. I found her to be very cold, very hard to relate to. I actually started to really enjoy some of the side characters. There's a second point of view in this book, a girl named Persephone. I'm not going to give away how she plays a role in this story, but suffice it to say that Persephone was the one that I was excited to read about and I wanted to know more. And she was also the character that carried out the climax of this novel. In a way, she was almost better than the main character, or at least the namesake on the top of the book. Or the title of the book. So I'm not exactly sure what to make of this. I would probably say that this is not Kate Elliott's strongest work. I gave it about 3 stars because it was a fun novel, but it took me a little bit longer to get into and I didn't enjoy the main character. I don't know, make what you will of that. I probably will be picking up the second in the series. I'll give it another try. Hopefully she'll have worked out all of the bugs and kinks and it'll become a better, bigger world that's more interesting. The next novel that I read was The Shadows of the Gods. Now this has been kind of a booktube baby. A lot of people are talking about this John Gwynne series and I hadn't really read anything by John Gwynne, so I decided to pick it up. It became available at my library, so I checked it out. For those of you who live under a rock, this book takes place in the North, and it's a big fantasy epic series that has the same kind of feel as the First Law trilogy. It's the world and the world building that really drag you in. The gods have all already died in a great battle before the book even starts, and the world is left in shambles as the monsters who are in the line of the gods who have magic are becoming more bold. All of the magic in the world is sort of running out. The premise of this book is a typical fateful encounter that leads all the characters on this epic long quest that's a little bit action-packed, a little bit of a mystery. I don't want to give it too much away, but suffice it to say there's a lot of heavy Norse mythology in here. Overall, I would give this story about 3.5 stars. I wasn't wowed by it. I'll probably read the second in the series, but I don't rush to have to read it right now, even though it is already out. I thought it was okay. I thought it was good. I really liked the North atmosphere, but I thought that Joe Abercrombie really did better. He did better character work, and he had a little bit more of an intrigue for me than John Gwynne does in this book. That said, it's still worth reading. It's still something where if you want to check it out, I highly recommend you do. The next book that I read was Full Moon, which is the second in the series of the Dresden Files. These books always follow Harry Dresden, a self-proclaimed wizard for hire who works mostly with the police to solve crimes that involve the supernatural. As the title of this one suggests, it's about werewolves. And it's a fast-paced, easy, fun read. Despite being the second one, you could easily pick it up and just jump in without reading the first one. Sometimes I just need a little palate cleanser or break in between some of the big series, so whenever I finish a big epic fantasy or a big giant sci-fi space opera, sometimes I just need something where I don't have to think a whole lot, and that's really the part that the Dresden Files is going to play for me. So, of course, I enjoyed this book. It's definitely one of those guilty pleasures where, again, you just don't have to think a lot. The next book I read was one that is not a usual read for me, and that is 1,000 Splendid Suns. This novel is by the same author who wrote The Kite Runner, and obviously he's gotten quite a lot of acclaim in a lot of the novels that he's written, and a lot of people talk about these novels. Almost everybody, hands down, has nothing but positive reviews for them. And so I was really surprised to say that this was my very first DNF for the year. And DNF means, of course, did not finish. I quit about halfway through, maybe a little over halfway through. It just didn't work for me. The characters were two main female characters who are Muslim and they're in the Middle East. And they're both ending up like sort of in this arranged forced marriage with this one particular gentleman. They're both very sad and depressing. It's very heart heavy and full of emotion. Not a whole lot happens. I felt like by the halfway point, I can kind of predict what was gonna happen. It wasn't gonna really be worth the trouble and the satisfaction of me getting to the end of the story because my emotions were already depressed enough as it was, and I didn't know that all of that emotional trauma was worth the ending for me. I did look it up later, and I was right about the ending, so I just decided that I have enough sadness in my life and I need to move on to something more escapism rather than depression, so I had to put the book down. For those of you out there who liked it, I'm so sorry. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And sometimes I'll try these books that aren't usually what I will expect to like or read, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and this one just didn't. After that, I needed something a little bit more lighthearted and a little bit more fun, so I decided to go ahead and pick up a YA fantasy novel that I've heard quite a lot about that I wasn't sure I was gonna like either, but that was the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber, I believe. This story follows the characters Scarlett and her sister Tella. They are growing up on an island where they're pretty sheltered as far as the ways of the world and are in a bad situation. Their mother is dead and their father is abusive, and so they escape their world and their reality to something called Caraval, which is kind of like a magical carnival where you have to participate in a large epic adventure mystery, and once you solve it, whoever wins gets a wish. Now, of course, the wish is anything you can because in this world magic exists. It was such a fantastic, beautifully written, imaginative story about a carnival and all of the magical elements that you would expect to have in a magical carnival. However, what it was for me was more about escapism. I didn't have to think a whole lot during this novel. There was kind of a love triangle situation happening. There were, of course, the two elements with the two different sisters, and this is, of course, the start of a trilogy. And so after I finished it, especially after the two previous books, I just needed a little bit of time, so I just fell into this story and it just absorbed me. I loved it so much that I ended up picking up the second book and then immediately the third book. The second book is called Legendary and the third book is called Finale. And while each book sort of follows both of the sisters, each one sort of takes a different role in each of the books. And I thought that they were fun and satisfying, and again, I just needed a world escapism book. After such a fun series, I was finally ready for something a little bit more in-depth in sci-fi, and so I decided to pick up The Last Watch. This book is by an unknown author, and it just came out in 2021, with the second book following behind it after only just a few months. Now, I really wanted to get into some of these new books that were coming out in science fiction and kind of try out some things and find out what I do and don't like in this new modern sci-fi era, since I've been reading all of the classics. So that being said, this one was a happy surprise for me. You were kind of following this princely, snobby rich kid who got kicked out and sent to the military, and now he's joining the Sentinels at the edge of the universe. And of course, while it's supposed to be kind of a punishment and a really boring job, this was the time, and it's kind of like the North Wall in Game of Thrones, where if something is gonna happen, it's gonna happen here at the edge of the universe, where humans are now guarding human space from alien invasion. Now, a lot of things happened in this book that were pretty science heavy, although I will say that the author did a really good job of not trying to over-explain too many science topics. So I never felt really overwhelmed by the heavy sci-fi. I just really liked some of the science fiction elements. It made for a really fun mystery. There is, of course, multiple points of view and multiple characters that I really loved in this series, and I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I definitely gave it a 4.5 stars just for overall love of the work. I didn't notice the prose in a good or a bad way. It did really well, especially for a debut novel. I will definitely be picking up book number 2 called The Exiled Fleet, hopefully in the next month. To follow that book up, I went ahead and picked up another booktube baby that I had heard so much about called The Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruccio. Not sure I said his last name correctly, but I think I did, so if not, I'm sorry. Empire of Silence is the first in a huge space opera series, and you can just feel that from the very beginning, how carefully the author is explaining to you the beginnings of the main character Hadrian, how he started off as nobility, and yet some things are going to happen to him that are really going to change who he is as a person. You can tell by how carefully he's building this character that there's going to be some things that go down in this world and to this character. I really enjoyed this one. It had some political maneuverings that were very much the forefront of this novel and really sort of pushed forward the plot. And because of that, it reminded me a little bit of the movie Gladiator, but it also reminded me of Red Rising a little bit, or at least the later books of Red Rising, where there was a lot of political maneuvering. There's a lot of violence and fighting and character growth through this first book, which made it really fun to go through with the character. This is a series that I will 100% be picking up and continuing. I highly recommend you guys check this out if you're in the mood for something like Gladiators but in space. That's probably how I would describe this series, although I haven't gone through the second book yet, so maybe things will change. I don't have much negative to say about this book other than it was a little bit slow pacing in the middle, and I kind of had to drag myself through some of the main parts of it. And I can tell that this is going to be the setup novel. I also think, if I'm correct, that this is the author's debut novel, which debuted several years ago. So I think there are 4 books out now, but I'll have to check that. It could be 5. Maybe there's only 4. I'm not sure. But one of the main books came out this year, and I think is supposed to come out again towards the end of the year, the next book. I believe that the author plans on writing 6. So if you're in it for a big sweeping series, if you liked Leviathan, Wakes, or the Expanse series, you'll probably like this series. Then of course I needed another break, so I went ahead and picked up something I knew I was gonna like. The book is called Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, for those of you who don't know me yet, which of course you don't since this is one of my first videos, Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of my all-time favorite science fiction authors. I'm gonna read everything he's ever written. And so of course, this was his new novella, so I went ahead and pre-ordered it. I got a little surprised because it has a signature in the front cover, so it's my very first signature copy by Adrian Tchaikovsky, or any author actually. This novella drops us into a pleasant farming village following the rambunctious son of the village mayor. This world is ruled by ogres, who come to each town to collect taxes during harvest time. And of course, our main character steps out of line one day and punches the Master Ogre's son, which of course is forbidden. There is an eye-opening adventure into a strange world from there, all while using the controversial narrative choice of second person. Any novella by Adrian Tchaikovsky is highly recommended. The Ogres one was really good. From the beginning pages, I thought he was going to go somewhere Robin Hood style with this, and it turned out to be something totally different. I don't want to ruin anything here, but these novels are definitely worth checking out. Ogres, the novella, high recommend. It's very easy, short read. Definitely could easily read it in a day, if not sooner. So that book was definitely a 5-star read for me. The next novel I picked up, or I should say novels, even though I feel like it should be a single book, and that is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler and The Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. This is a series called Earthseed, which follows a girl named Lauren Olamina as she's in advanced futuristic California, where the world and our society is way different. Something has happened to destroy our society, and we are definitely in lawless times where there is a lot of starvation, there is a lot of death and vagrancy and lawlessness, and everything and everyone is unsafe. And it's about Olamina's struggle to survive and believe in humanity amongst this dire, bleak future that she's facing, as well as her coping mechanism, which is the creation of Earthseed as a religion. Fair warning, there are a lot of trigger warnings. There is some rape, there is slavery. Nothing was overly graphic. We didn't have to go through a very descriptive scenes of any of these things. So if you're worried about that, I wouldn't be too much. Octavia Butler, even when bad things happen, she's always somehow very hopeful. I think I'm gonna do a big review on this series because it was something that was really interesting for me. It was definitely a 5-star read. I will warn you that the first book does not end, as in there is no climax. And that's because I think that these two novels really should have just been one story. So you will have to pick up the second one to really get to any sort of climax or ending of the story. But what can you say bad about Octavia Butler? I'll have to go over that in a different video, but she's definitely an author worth checking out. For those of you out there who would like to continue more and check out my channel, please consider subscribing. Any YouTubers can use a little bit of love. Always smash the like button if you want to help us out with our algorithm. And of course, if you want to get into any book discussions down below, or you have any good suggestions for me, be sure to leave a comment down below. Thanks again, and see you next time.